Hello everybody and welcome back to the JakesRCChitChat Stuff channel. Today we're going to be discussing the new radio that I have purchased because I've changed my mind. As human beings, we do occasionally believe that we have made a mistake. We are not infallible beings and we decide to go back on choices that we have made. And the choice that I'm talking about in this episode is the fact that I have bought a Futaba 16SZ to replace the 14SG that I've been using since 2013, and the radio that I got for Christmas in 2020, so it's 3 months old, my FRsky Taranis Special Edition 2019, blah blah blah. Now this video is going to be a podcast style episode, which means that it's going to be basically just a black screen, possibly some text on if I can be bothered, but the main thing is listening to my dulcet tones as I talk to you through my opinions and feelings and why I've decided to do what I've decided to do. Now, one other thing that I will point out, I have got a bit of a cold, so I'm a bit snivelly, and also it keeps hailing on and off, so you may hear occasionally some sort of like pattering outside. That is going to be the hail. So, why have I decided to buy the 16SZ instead of using the Taranis? The reason why I originally went for the Taranis was for two reasons. It was I didn't like the route that Futaba were going. I still think, in some ways, that their best radio was the Futaba 10, with its programming system and its click wheel. The 14... some of its programming is just a bit bizarre and like setting dual rates that even in the FRsky, which was a couple of years back, was hard for me to learn. At least setting a dual rate is all done in one menu, as opposed to in the 14, or is it the 8, or is it the 16 that I've got now that I have to just swap to it. It has it in two different menus, like you assign the switches in one menu and then you put the actual dual rate amounts in a different menu. Just bloody bizarre, to be brutally honest with you, and I don't know why. But, shouldn't be much of a problem. We can get around that. But the reason why is I didn't like the fact that we're now moving on to these touchscreens, and the big problem with the touchscreen is I like scroll wheels. I really do like scroll wheels. The one in the 14 was crap, because it was a weird touch one. You know, they tried to sort of do an iPod style one, and it was crap. Like, the issue is that it was like a piece of plastic on top of the sensor, and it didn't work very well at the best of times. And if it was, say, cold and you put your warm thumb on there, condensation would build up, just press all the keys at once and it wouldn't know how to spin, and it was crap. Honestly, crap. And something that really got me on the sort of FRsky train, because I didn't really like the original Taranis, was the scroll wheel on the X7S, which is my blue FPV radio. That scroll wheel works fine. I learnt OpenTX with it, and I got on with it very well. So I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a FRsky Taranis SE, because that moved away from the buttons to a scroll wheel. Instead of it being like a circle, like a 2p coin on top of the radio, it sort of rotated sideways, a bit like what they have on the Spectrum. And I've used the Spectrum wheel before and liked it, and I got on with OpenTX with the rotating wheel on the X7S. So I decided we'll go for that. Another benefit I had after a bit of researching is I could buy a TM7 module, plug that into the back of the Taranis with a little adapter board from Flytron, and then we would be able to, for all my sort of cheaper stuff, I can keep the Futaba receivers in there and bind it to this module. And then for all my decent stuff, that's when I would have to go out and buy some FRsky 8-channel receivers and do a bit of a swap. And, you know, they're not expensive. I mean, I've got some still brand new in the box R8 Pro Archer Access receivers. They're about 32 quid from T9 Hobby Sport. I've got two of the 8 channels, and I've also got the, what's this, Archer R6, which is brand new in the plastic. Going to be selling on eBay now. And so that was the idea. The reason why I've decided I'm going to nip that idea in the bud, that radio is still going to live with me. I'm probably going to sell the TM7 module because I don't need that. But I'm going to use it as my new FPV radio, and eventually the X7 is going to be phased out. It's going to still be in use conjunction with the Taranis for a bit, and then eventually I'm probably going to buy another Taranis to go with the X7, possibly a jumper, because I'll go into that in a moment. So, I have 5 things that have changed my mind. 4 of them are issues with the Taranis, and the last one is just sort of a thing that I've noticed over the last little while. So, first thing is that click wheel. So it was completely new. One of the problems, especially as we were in lockdown and things like that, there was no shows, and even at shows, they didn't seem to do the... One of the good things about shows or going to a model shop is, especially if you're buying a new radio that's normally expensive, and it's sort of the thing that needs to feel good in the hands. They had one that was sort of open box. You could get it out, they'd have it in your hand, and you could sort of turn it on and play with the sticks and things like that. Hard to do that with FRsky because most model shops don't carry FRsky stuff. It's sort of the smaller stuff. You import a lot of stuff from China. T9 Hobby Sport is relatively close to me, but it's basically, from my understanding, just a warehouse. It's not a proper shop. It's in Bradford, so it's not. I think it's Bradford, so it's not that far away. I could have gone there if I wanted to, but again, at the same time, the radios are so relatively cheap. Is there much point to that? I'll just double check something on my phone. Bear with me a moment. Okay. So this click wheel, there's a few problems with it. The main problem is that it's crap. What I mean is that when you scroll on a Spectrum, which has the same type of idea, if you move it 1 click to the right, it moves down 1. If you move 3 clicks down, it moves 3 clicks down. The FRsky does whatever it wants. Sometimes you'll move it 5 clicks to the right and it'll move down 2 or 3. Because sort of it's like it takes 2 clicks for it to go, oh, you actually do want to move this, let's go on. And I can see pros and cons to this. You know, if you've got jittery fingers for whatever reason, you know, it may be better than it accidentally flick to the wrong thing and all of a sudden you're changing the dual rate on your elevator, not your aileron or whatever, you know, the movements. So I can see why in some ways it's good, but at the same time it's awful. Absolutely bloody awful in terms of... It also does this thing where if you kind of flick at it, you know, let's say you're doing dual rates and you want to go from 100% down to 20. You have to go click, 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 you know, scroll to get it down. If you sort of do a flick like you could do on the Spectrums, it binks at 0. That's not what I wanted you to do. It just goes bink, goes down. Basically, if that scroll wheel moves 1 click, I want it to move 1 on the thing, and it doesn't do that, unfortunately. It has a mind of its own. Another problem with that is most of the Spectrum menus are 1 or 2, maybe 2.5 full scrolls of that dial. You know, maybe there's 10 clicks on that dial. No menus have more than 20 options. And it also means that, you know, say we go back to that example of moving it from 100% down to 20. It's click, 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 click. It's 4 scrolls of it. And, you know, probably the third one you're going to slow down to make sure you don't go past it. Problem is with FRsky, for example, when you're doing the audio stuff especially, you're scrolling for days. And that crappy scroll wheel that, you know, if you flick at it too fast, it only moves like 2 or 3, even though you've moved 10 clicks technically, is a nightmare. And also, the way it sits in the radio, when you're doing that, your thumb is sort of constantly going into like a sharp edge. The Spectrum sort of have it so that that isn't a problem. You're going into, it's not sharp, it's not like you're going into a knife, but it's just not that pleasant. And to say that the scroll wheel on the X7, which is the cheaper radio below that one, is better, is a little disappointing. And I presume something like the Horus is the same, because it has the same sort of, like having a 2-piece sat on your radio. As opposed to, say, like a barber's pole is the easiest way to describe one, if you've not seen a Spectrum radio. But So yeah, I mean, the reason why I was even looking at Horus's at one point as my sort of next radio. The reason I didn't go for that, and the reason why I wouldn't have an X7 as my day-to-day go-to radio, is I don't like the tray radio format. I like the normal format. And why have I not gone for a jumper? I don't think they've as proven yet as FRsky. And also, there's been issues where, like, the first few batches are brilliant, and then the second one is, it turns out they've swapped all the cables from being separate nice cables to being ribbon cables that snap really easily. I just don't trust jumper as of yet, and trust is something that we're going to go into more with this. So point number 2 is the Futaba module. Now, the Futaba module itself is fine. The adapter board is fine. The module bay is sort of fine. The problem is, because it's a JR module bay, that's why we have to have the adapter to adapt it from a Futaba module to a JR module. It's only held in with 2 lots of double-sided tape. So double-sided tape to hold the adapter board in, and double-sided tape to hold the module in. Now, this is one of the reasons why it was only going to be used for my cheaper planes. Things like the Night Vision Air, Hobby King Yak, little foamy things that don't really matter. All the nice stuff, so bigger foamies, all of my jets were going to go on there, my EDF jets, and my Kiki Yak, Carden Yak, Hanging Iron Extra, things like that, we're going to go on there, on the normal FRsky system. But I decided that even just as safety reasons, I don't like the idea of that being in. Because when do I decide I need to change that double-sided tape? Because, if it gets cold or hot or whatever, the tape unsticks. The tape that I use is very good. I use it in multi-rotors to keep flight controllers in, and always does very well. I mean, especially mini quads, they get flipped about and smacked about so much, and it takes a lot for them to come off. So a module that's sitting there is fine. But to be honest with you, I didn't really trust it. And another issue is that module can't do 606 receivers, so I'd have to swap them out anyway. It also I'm just adding another point on here. Some of the 8 channels don't work, and it would just be a pain in the arse. So I've decided against it for that reason. There's also the actual FRsky link. Now, this is a bit more of me than FRsky themselves. One of the reasons that sold me on it is that I do hear very little of issues. FRsky is what's recommended to people if they want FPV long range, or they have a long range system, things like that. And the old ACCST system seems very good. Seems very much an infallible system. Really not heard of people having any massive issues with it. The problem that we've got is I'm not using ACCST. All of my receivers are the new Access. R8 Pro, R6. I do have a 4-channel one that was in the Watt 4 that I don't particularly know where it's gone to anymore. I'm not sure if that's Access or the old D16 system. I can't remember. But the problem is that isn't as tested as much as ACCST. Access is a completely different thing. I don't see FRsky fucking it up, to be brutally honest with you. But again, it's just untested. And, if I was flying, foamies up to £500, I'd be alright. But I have more expensive stuff. I want to get more expensive stuff. I'm looking at you, Pilot RC Predator. And other things that I just... basically. It's other things like, for example, as that module comes out, does it accidentally shut... if that radio falls... if that module fell out, the Futaba module, I wasn't even using it, could it short out a pin that crashes the plane on FRsky? Different things like that. And I did kind of think, I'm putting all this money into putting all the nice planes on these receivers. What if, in 5 or 6 years' time, they swap from Access to something else? I know this was a big complaint by XJet that, he got into FRsky stuff very early. They then swapped to ACCST, and a lot of his receivers then became incompatible. He then, this Archer stuff's come out, and again, you can backtrack now, but at some point they could cut that off. With the 14 SG and up with Futaba, supports every receiver they've ever made. Still. 14 SG, 16 SZ, 18 MZ, SZ. Let me start again. 14 SG, 16 SZ, 18 SZ, 18 MZ, and the new 32 MZ. All support every receiver they've ever made, whether it's the fastest, the FHSS and the TFHSS for the cheaper stuff. They all work. I don't trust FRsky to necessarily be the thing. I'm talking about compatibility. So I have been looking at more expensive stuff again. It's been a while. Well, it's been a few years since I had my Kiki Yak from Flex Innovations. I thought the itch for something new. Either a jet or a 50cc electric. Probably both going to be Pilot RC. They're slick. I really like they're slick. I haven't got the space for the 100. 50cc electric. Especially now I'm really happy with the X Power motors. Something I'm definitely looking into. And I was looking into the Powerbox. And Powerbox will work with FRsky in terms of the controlling, because it's S-Bus. S-Bus is just S-Bus. It'll use Futaba's S-Bus fine. But say, for example, I want a telemetry. So batteries and things like that. Battery voltage. If I want that on a Powerbox, I have to buy a separate Futaba adapter, which obviously I'm going to have to do anyway. The Futaba Tele Connector or whatever it's called. And then for FRsky, I have to plug it into a Arduino clone with like a resistor hanging out of one end. You can look this up. You can look at Powerbox to FRsky telemetry converters. And load some code that some random blokes made on the internet. And that's how it works. Now that's not necessarily a problem, because to be fair, if the telemetry stopped working, not the biggest deal in the world, but if it somehow shorts out, similar to the Futaba module dropping out the back of the radio even when I'm flying on a FRsky link, it could crash an incredibly expensive plane. I mean, you're looking at nearly $4,500-5,000 for a jet. Yes. And for the jet, for example, regardless of whether the two that I'm looking at are either King Tech or Swiwin, because I've not heard many problems about Swiwin, and to be honest with you, it's such a price difference of like £500 that I haven't heard anything bad about the Swiwin. As long as I can get the Swiwin serviced in the UK, okay, I'm probably going to go for the Swiwin for multiple different reasons, which I'll go into down the line whenever that jet arrives on my doorstep. But the Swiwin plugs directly into S-Bus and does telemetry. King Tech, I think you need a fairly cheap adapter, or it may be built in, I'm not sure. But with either of them, if you want to use them with FRsky, you have to buy a between £80 and £100 adapter, which I'm glad is professionally made. It's not this sort of weird soldered together yourself with a resistor hanging out of one end system. It's better than that. But at the same time, if you look at the price of receivers, which is the next thing I'm going to get onto, receivers now have actually gone down in price from when I built my Kiki Yak. They're about £80-85 now. Okay, and the FRsky ones are 32, okay, so still a lot cheaper. But by the time you've paid for your £80 adapter, it's obviously more expensive, actually, the FRsky setup. I do appreciate that, especially if you're using something like Powerbox and you're going to be using redundancy receivers, you can get your 2 redundancy receivers for the same price with change as the Futaba one. I fully appreciate that. The big problem, as I say, is, and I haven't actually got this as a point on here. I'll come back to Ashley. So the other thing is programming. A lot of my planes, because they're on the 14, are going to be able to just be converted across. The Flex Jet will need finishing, because I was only halfway through programming on the 14, and the Watt 4 will need putting back in, because I deleted it off the radio when I test through it on the Taranis. So the Flex Jet and the Viper Jet haven't been deleted yet, because I delete them after they've been test flown and confirmed as okay. So if needed, I can go back to settings and things like that. But So all I'm going to have to do is copy all the models to an SD card. Unfortunately, there isn't a copy all, so I've got to do each one of the 18 that's on there, because I've cleared out all the ones I don't have anymore. I've got 18 on there that I need to move across. I have to copy and paste them all manually. There's no like direct copy across. There's no computer program for it, like the Taranis. There are some stuff that Taranis does better. Again, cheaper receivers for stuff that aren't that important is great. Voice is fantastic, especially on the FlexJet, because I don't use gyros in any planes that are not FPV. Other than that, for now, that will change. For any of the, regardless if I get a jet or a big 50cc electric, they're going to have power boxes with iGyro sats in them. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit. Let's have a wee break, shall we? A wee break, if you want to go for an actual wee break instead of the Scottish wee. Feel free to pause the video. I just meant a little break so I can wet my whistle. So yeah, the programming is going to be a lot easier. Just rebind. I haven't done any today because I'm waiting for an SD card to come. And I also want to be able to, because once you update the software after version 3.9 of the software, they introduced Model Match for Futaba. It's called Model ID, but it's basically Model Match from Futaba. And the problem is because of that, you have to rebind all your models. So there's no point me setting up 3 models, then have to rebind them again. So I'm going to wait for the SD card to come and just do them all from there. So that's why I'm not currently sat there beavering away getting models swapped over. Especially at least the Watt 4 that I'm not going to have to program from scratch anyway. Another thing, of course, is the fact that once I've done 1 or 2 models and made sure they are completely okay, the programming is going to be fine in terms of just knowing the conversion is going to be okay. Because the problem is when you're converting it from the Futaba to the Taranis, there is the chance of accidentally, making a mistake. Things should be double checked, like directions and things. But if I accidentally, take off one plane with the ailerons reversed, it's a bloody nightmare. But yeah. So again, the main sort of extra points I want to put on here is that it's all about being comfortable and not being worried. It's hard to be doing 3D or something drastic when in the back of mind you've got, what if this fails now? Regardless of why. It's one of the reasons why I was also looking at the FRsky alternative to Powerbox. For various different reasons, I decided no. Just because there's no information really about it on the internet. And also, you have to use 3-cell lipos for it to then regulate them down to 2 cells, whereas the Powerbox Pioneer will just have 2-cell lipos and pass them through. Things like that. The Powerbox equipment, by the time you've got... So the Powerbox Pioneer is £180, then £90 for the gyro, and you've got basically the equivalent setup as the £150 FRsky. So it's half the price, again, but I trust Powerbox with my life. Whereas I don't know the FRsky RD30 or whatever it is from Adam. So, if I'm putting that at the heart of a $4,000 jet, it's 4.5 when I put all the Powerbox and Futaba stuff in it. But yeah, it's just a bit concerning. So yeah, confidence is the main important thing. The second thing that I would say is that there are stuff that I'm going to miss about the Taranis. The voice stuff, for example. The Futaba only really has voice on telemetry. But say, for example, this is where I got on to talk about gyros. On the FlexJet, it's the only plane that has gyros in that isn't FPV. And with FPV, at worst, you can normally see the modes on the screen, unless it's like the co-pilot that doesn't have an on-screen display. But, the most of them have an on-screen display where you can see the mode. The FlexCheck doesn't, and it's very different because it also has the modes for the vector and gyro and everything. So it was very useful in case I didn't fly that for say 6 months or whatever reason, being able to remember it. Well, you know what? I can just make a laminated card. I have a laminator, I have a printer, I have a computer, as you can tell. So it'll be fine. So we are going to be moving away from the Taranis for my regular planes. It's going to be actually moved into the role of FPV planes. The current sort of setup for me, if you didn't know, is I have my 14SG for regular planes. I had my Taranis that was new for regular planes that stuff was being slowly moved on to. I have my FRsky X7S, which is for my newer FPV stuff and runs on easy UHF and the R9M stuff. Had the FilForce 10, which was for older FPV stuff, with the easy UHF sort of big boy transmitter on the back of it as opposed to the module, and a DX6 for ultra micros. What I plan on changing it to is the 16SZ. Oh dear. The 16SZ is going to be for all regular planes. The Taranis is going to be used for the easy UHF big boy stuff, and all of my easy UHF stuff is going to be moved to that module. To that transmitter instead of the module. The X7 is going to be for all R9 stuff, as it already is, so nothing's really going to change with that. It's just going to have models taken off of it. And that may possibly be upgraded to another Taranis, just because the X7 could do with more switches. The sort of leather bits on the side are coming off the X7, so a Taranis Special Edition, but in blue, for that possibly. And also for both of the Taranises, I would modify it so that the individual modules get separate power. So they get external power, which means that they're not drawing as much power through the radio. So with the I can't do that with the X7 as well, but with the Taranises I can have the battery off. It will fit a 3-cell in, because I know these UHF, for example, has to have 12 volts going into it. I'm fairly sure. You're always best to put as well the max voltage, because then it pulls less amps. The X6 has actually already been sold for the ultra micros. I do have a module somewhere to allow us to use it. That can go in one of the Taranises, I guess. Be easier to put it in the X7/Blue Taranis whenever I get that. The FilForce 10, after many, many happy years, FilForce 10 module edition, not the newer one that didn't have one, will be retired. And the 14SG, when I say retired, it's just going to be put in a box, really. And the 14 will either be sold or be kept as a backup for both Dad and me. So yeah, that's what's happening in terms of radios. I'm quite happy that I've kept this below half an hour. It's only 28 minutes. But if I can upload this as it is, I did record a bit of video of me opening up the 16, which I'm probably going to edit at the beginning of me swapping over stuff to the 16. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Hopefully you can understand why. If you have any particular questions, feel free to have them in the comments. Don't go on the fanboy wagon, either for Vitaba or FRsky or some other brand. The only other that I did look at is Jetty, but what confuses me about Jetty is I'd probably be in the same place of keeping either the 14 or using the Taranis with the module for the cheaper stuff, and then the Jetty would be used for the more expensive stuff. I do have more cheap stuff than expensive stuff, to be fair, but also that means 2 radios. Again, trying to minimalise radios, if anything, if I can do. If I could go to just one FPV radio, that'd be great, but I don't like swapping modules out. I'm already doing that on the X7 and don't really like it. So yeah, I like Jetty, but can't afford it. And even the cheapest Jetty is like £600. And depending on what type of programming you got, you can have like different software sets on the same radio. It costs anywhere between 600 or nearly 700 and nearly £1,000 for their base one that does 8 channels. To be fair, probably don't go above 8 channels at any of my planes. Even something like a jet that would have flaps and everything probably wouldn't. unless I then put a vector on it and flaps and gear and everything. So these 8 channels on the Flex jet, but it doesn't have flaps like your mum does. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Please like, subscribe and stuff. And leave some comments as long as they're nice. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.